act quickly, fail fast. If you come up with an 80% solution in 20% of the time, think of how good that is. Don't let, I think you said, Crystal, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And something else I think that is very important for us to be mindful of is that we're not talking about, whether there's a ninth planet, or whether Pluto is a planet, or whether, the magnetic field strength in the sun is 10 to the 12 Gauss or 4 times 10 to the 11 Gauss. We are talking about human fundamentals: clean water, food, clean air, reliable energy, disaster response, property, and health. And this is not a Coke or Pepsi kind of conversation. These are fundamental to human existence. And that really makes this a special and important application of space. Those are things that are sticking in my brain. So there was a question at the end, what would you want to go do next? Here's some things I think we might think about. Given that there is brain power in the region, what does a regional satellite application hackathon look like? We had a discussion, I think, about a hackathon earlier, but what innovations and applications can you draw quickly from talent in the region? Roberta is up here, and Roberta runs the technical committee on integrated satellite applications for the IAF. They meet at least twice yearly, and I think a conversation around a Latin American working group within this technical group might be something interesting. Talk to your governments. Our colleague from JAXA, I think it was you that mentioned good government and taking care of the needs of people. I might be mistaken, but I thought I heard that during your talk. Cicero wrote many centuries ago, Salus populi suprema lex esto, the welfare of the people is the highest law. It's also the motto of my home state of Missouri in the United States. If you want good governance, it needs good input, and it needs your productive engagement. And probably Twitter is not the way to do that. We're running that experiment now, where I live. It begins with education. I would encourage, grow whatever you can, indigenous space-related educational opportunities, curriculum, research, networking, professional development. I was speaking with Alejandra from Paraguay. Connect your cultural heritage to the sky. Everybody has the sky as a common heritage. It's a great place to start. We look at the sky, we talk about the stars, you call it a dipper, I call it a bear. Okay, fine. It's the same set of stars in the sky. I think it would be reasonable to try to figure out how you might raise $2.5 million and find 50 good ideas and have each one of them funded at $50,000 on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, and see what could be grown here in Latin America. Simply this, if this fails, fine, it fails fast, and it's $2.5 million generated from all over the region. It doesn't place a significant financial burden on anyone. And then last but not least on this slide, Victoria is sitting to my left. She's a wonderful example of what happens when bright, motivated individuals get engaged. This conference has been fantastic, and I encourage you to find and nourish and grow your Victorias. They are all around you. We saw look at the young people in the audience today. I'm sorry to call you young men Victoria. Victor. Grow your Victor or grow your Victoria. They have the answers. They know what they need. They know what we need. They will live in the world that we have created, for better or worse. But they need help, and they need mentoring, and they need funding, and they need guidance. And last, there's nothing new in the world. There are no new ideas. There are, but sometimes there aren't. I will conclude with this. One of the things about my career that is most interesting and sometimes most problematic for me from a ethical kind of perspective, when I went to Marshall Space Flight Center in 1987, there were still members of the original German rocket team working at Marshall Space Flight Center for NASA. And it was part history museum to be able to sit next to Ernst Stuhlinger at the cafeteria. He was von Braun's chief scientist. It was part amazing at how technically fantastic these individuals were, and it was a little problematic too because the history was also, it's always difficult when you talk about World War II and Nazi Germany and everything else. Dr. Stuhlinger received a letter from Sister Mary Jacunda, who was a Catholic nun in Africa in May of 1970, and she basically asked him, why in the world are you spending all of this money on space when there are children starving in Africa and we have all of these problems? and I don't mean to be pedantic, but these words are worth reading. This is a man who was a refugee, writing in his second language about the importance of what we do. Large areas of land could be utilized far better if efficient methods of watershed control, fertilizer use, weather forecasting, fertility assessment, plantation programming, field selection, planting habits, timing of cultivation, crop survey, and harvest planning were applied. 1970, the best tool for the improvement of all of these functions undoubtedly is the artificial Earth satellite. Here we are. Efficient relief from hunger, I'm afraid, will not come before the boundaries between nations have become less divisive than they are today. I do not believe that spaceflight will accomplish this miracle overnight. However, the space program is certainly among the most promising and powerful agents working in this direction. I feel that in this room today. As a stimulant and catalyst for the development of new technologies and for research in the basic sciences, it is unparalleled by any other activity, talking about space. In this respect, we may even say that the space program is taking over a function which for 3,000 or 4,000 years has been the sad prerogative of boys. This is the kind of movement and effort that we're engaged in. And lastly, I'll conclude here. I believe that none of these celestial objects, moon, planets, Mars, galaxies, will find as much attention and study by space scientists as our Earth. It will become a better Earth, not only because of all the new technological and scientific knowledge with which we will apply to the betterment of life, but also because we are developing a far deeper appreciation of our Earth, of our life, and with due respect to Jean-Yves Le Gall and the 3G agenda, and of mankind. This letter is worth reading. It's why we're here. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Thank you very much, John. And now plenary number 2 was focusing on space for more effective agriculture and maritime. Victoria, if you could give us the summary.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, John, for everything you said. And the last remarks also are very important because they go together with what this panel was all about, that is space for more effective agriculture and maritime. And the reason, I mean, as John said in the last slide, I mean, it's super important to become more efficient right now. As you can see, the UN, the global life expectancy is growing a lot. Also, the world population, according to the UN, I mean, last year, I think, or 2 years ago, it was supposed to be like 9.1 billion. Now the estimation for 2050 is of 9.8 billion. And the thing is, we have to be able to feed all these people. And in order to do that, we need to grow 70% more food than what we have right now. And according to the World Bank, because of the bad use of resources and because of climate change, the production could even, the crop yields could even lower by 25%. And we only have one Earth, so we need to start producing more in the lands that we have, and for that we need to make it a lot more efficient. And this panel was very important for Uruguay. Guadalupe Tiscornia, that was one of the speakers, she pointed out that 93% of the territory in Uruguay is for agriculture and farming. So for us it's very important, and seeing how to make it more efficient and be able to grow more, and also it's a matter of economics too. The panel and the session was with a very diverse group, which covered. The session started with an entrepreneur, Satellogic, which is a great company that is Argentinian, but they are manufacturing satellites in Uruguay, which is something most people don't know in Uruguay, that we actually have people manufacturing. And their plans are that by 2020 have over 300 satellites orbiting Earth. And that 300 satellites are built here. So that is pretty impressive. And I think it goes together with other things that the panelists kept mentioning, that is, there is a problem of outreach. There is a problem that the people don't know the tools that they can have regarding space applications. Gerardo also made a lot of examples of what they are doing with Satellogic, But basically, when they have the 300 satellites, they will be able to have a picture of the Earth daily. There are other companies in the world trying doing similar things, but that is, imagine all the changes that you will be able to monitor and all the insights you can have if you have a constant image of the Earth all the time. Then we in the panel, we also had Christina Janopapa from the European Space Agency that spoke mostly about the space applications and what she spoke about agriculture, and Marta. I mean, we can track vessels right now, but also she talked about several applications that European Space Agency is focusing on. For example, how the SSMOS satellite was used to detect soil moisture for drought monitoring, and this can anticipate crop failure that can be used to predict and prevent famine, just like John was saying. I mean, all these tools are super important then to benefit and to impact humankind. Also, she mentioned about water monitoring in Africa for water supply, quality, surface temperature, balanced precipitation and evaporation. And of course, and she finished, one thing that I think was very important, was that we should use space as an enabler. And this is an enabler for expanding the frontiers of knowledge, for assisting decision and policy makers in sectoral policies, for entrepreneurship. I think we saw all over the conference, and especially through the slide of the pizza, now the beef, from John, that yeah. So from that slide, that you don't need, I mean, it's not, people generally think about space as rocket science, but no, I mean, now we have satellite imagery, and one of the questions made to Christina was, is the European Space Agency satellite imagery available? Yes, it's available for everyone. You don't have to be European, or you don't have to pay. Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 data, you can get it and you can start doing your own applications. Then we also had remarks from Jairo Becerra, more in the policy and the regulations. He spoke about the principles of relating to remote sensing. It shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all countries, and shall promote the protection of the Earth's natural environment. And he highlighted that it's not only a matter of having the policy, but having the mediums to develop it. Because, for example, in the case of Colombia, it happened that they had a very good policy, but then they lacked the budget to develop it. So that is also another important thing. Also in the panel, we have the investment side, which is Gustavo Crespi from the Inter-American Development Bank. He made an introduction to the IDB, and he also said that the IDB already funded in the region $50 million to do 2 satellites, the SAOCOM 1 and 2. I mean A and B. And they already funded also a platform called ISAGRO that delivers primary info in moisture of soil, firewood prevention, first analysis and prevention, evolution of forestry areas and drought areas. And then he also is funding, they are also funding another that is called Ceres, that will be operational in 2019, that has everything that ISAGRO has, plus it can monitor crops and flood emergencies. And there were several questions for Gustavo in terms of funding. He said that the bank is all, of course, open. Not so much for startups because they require really little money, so it's a bit complicated. But they are open to fund space projects, and they have already invested in science and technology. I think it's in the past 10 years, over $10 billion. And then finally, we have Guadalupe that provided the perspective of Uruguay. And as I was saying yesterday in the panel, many times when I organized, when we were organizing the conference and when we were telling people in Uruguay about, hey, we're having this conference, Global Applications Conference, people were like, why? Why in Uruguay? So people don't really realize that there are things done. As the 300 satellites that are being manufactured, there is also the people from INEA, that is the Agricultural Research Institute, that is actually that they are doing research and using satellite imagery to detect anomalies in the crops and also to improve the productivity. So there is a lot being done. There was also a discussion on whether we have a satellite or not. We don't have a satellite yet. Hopefully we will have soon a Uruguayan satellite. There was the Antelsat, yeah, CubeSat, but maybe then we will have a better. But I think that then we close with remarks for the future. And I asked them, like, what do you think for the future? And Guadalupe, one of the things she said is, we already have our part of the future. I mean, we're already using AI, and she talks about robotic farms and smart farms. So this is happening. Unfortunately, people are starting to adopt it. The main concern, I think, that was part of the panel was how to make the policymakers and the decision makers aware of all the technology that is available. And as John was saying, it's not a waste of money, it's an investment into the productivity of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Next is Space for Integrated Risk Management. Roberta, please.
Okay, so our panel was also quite diverse. The participants were Beatrice from European Space Agency, Dr. Maria Mercedes from University of Salvador, John Venspum from the company IMSG, and Oleg Wysocki from Ukraine. So I would say that at the beginning, the focus of the plenary was more on the application. And the application was actually the application that we are developing in our department. And basically there were two examples that were presented, and it gives an idea of what we can do integrating Earth observation with GNSS and with satellite communication. But in relation to the topic of the plenary, was also important to see how the space can be a key element in the services against the CBRN, which stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive threat, based on the integration of the space data. And let's say there were several discussions about how this space-based solution can be addressed. And basically the measure takeout was the space asset actually added value enable for services, not only for the risk management, for risk assessment, also in the energy, in the safety, in the logistics, and in the earth. So, and after that, it was very interesting. After having spoke about the CBRN, there was the discussion on how space can help and can support to prepare or to prevent and to monitor and to recover in case of a disaster. Okay, and it was very interesting. What was pointed out, which is actually the need to have this interdisciplinary scientific network, to have, let's say, the right fund to manage this network, but also what was pointed out was the need of having a preparation and training done. And again, what we could see is that satellite communication can play a very important role, because if in case of a major disaster, the first things that will be going down most likely will be the terrestrial network, so satellite communication, as well as Earth observation for images of the movement of the people and so on, and GNSS data. Here, let's say there was also the very motivating and visionary talk of John, and here basically what it came out that the message, the takeout is really that everyone has the idea. We have, let's say, the availability now of the data that are there, so what we need is to apply the knowledge and the know-how that we have. We don't need a lot of big money, we need just to think about the need, what are the requirements, and to adapt to certain solution. And solution can be innovative in the sense that it can include private, public sector, NGO, But what is, I think, very important is the last sentence that I put here, so that we all can see what we all are doing. And this is also the key that is also related to this international collaboration, because as our resources, also I'm speaking about the agency or the institution, are scarce, we can do much more if we are all together and if we are, let's say, sharing our knowledge, our expertise and solution. So I think this was a very good message. The other important things was also the discussion that we had on the weather and the climate forecasting tool. This was also interesting. And again, also here, okay, it was more focused on the aviation, but actually weather and climate forecasting are actually in all the other sector and in all the economic sector, agriculture, urban, prediction of flood, prediction of, and this is exactly what you were mentioning. But again, also here, there is another common point. So the importance of the collaboration, and again, the importance and the understanding that by integrating space data, integrating with all the data that we have available and terrestrial capability, we can improve a lot of things. And just to remember that today, I think in the afternoon, we should have the launch by SpaceX Falcon of 2 satellites that they will be in tandem, and they will be actually should bring a lot of more data about the climate. This should be one of the Falcon launch SpaceX. Okay, then it was also interesting. Then really going back to the CBRN and also not to the risk assessment. The discussion that we had on how Earth observation data, but most this ionospheric scintillation, ionospheric anomaly can, let's say, help and can bring forward in this analysis of earthquake prediction. I would say that earthquake prediction is something that has been ongoing for decades, and let's say there are a lot of study, and it's very interesting that they are going to do with the ionospheric. That is also something that is recommended, but let's say again, the result is still to be seen, and it is also. I didn't know that they had already this Ukrainian satellite, and that they will launch next year another one. But again, also in this speech, the important point was again international collaboration, which I have seen in all the plenary coming back. So the 5 points that I put together, they take out are, first of all, the space asset are added value enable for services, not only on the risk management, but in all other sectors. We need the international collaboration, not only for disaster preparedness, but also for, like for the last point, for earthquake warning. Then space data and what we have actually is really what we need to do. So as John said, let's go to work and to provide and share between us the innovative solution. And also we have importance on the climate and the weather, the importance of the space data. And I would like to conclude, as John said, that I'm chairing this technical committee on the space application, integrated application. We meet at the spring meeting, we meet in occasion of the IAC, so really I invite you to participate or send me an email. And I think it's a very good idea after this conference thinking about to have a subgroup dedicated on the Latin America. So I would like you to follow that. Thank
you very much. Plenary 4 was focusing on space technologies for detection and study of climate change. And Jean-Pascal, the floor is yours for the summary.
Thank you. During this panel, it was recalled that satellites are vital tools to help understand the mechanism of climate change in order to mitigate its effect and help societies devise coping strategies. Thanks to their global observations and the continuity of their measurements, they provide time series of extremely valuable data, which are the basis for several international climate-related programs. It has been recalled that out of the 50 essential climate variables, or ECVs, defined by the Global Climate Observing System, 26 can only be measured from space. Tackling climate change is a top priority for all of the panelists, and by the way for the audience too, as was shown by the answers given in real time to the polls questions. And they addressed in their presentations how we can innovate to sustain and step up the pace of our efforts to tackle climate change. International cooperation, as was said by my predecessor, is obviously a fundamental element of this endeavor. The panel discussion has showcased some key examples on how space technologies are useful to tackle climate change, both from institutional, academic, and private actors. During his keynote, Salam Al-Mari, the Assistant Director General for Scientific and Technical Affairs at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, highlighted the main areas of the Emirates Space Program, including the Mars probe to be launched in 2020, the Mars Science City, the Emirati Astronauts Corps under selection, and the successful Earth observation program undertaken by MBRSC. He then presented the whole spectrum of space applications developed within MBRSC with the help of DubaiSat satellites. New Emirati satellites projects concerning greenhouse gas detection from satellite were also discussed. Maria del Lujan Flores opened the discussion on the panel by presenting a comprehensive view of the legal international framework in which climate change is tackled, but more generally about the enforcement of international cooperation in this important domain, stating that the practice of states and recent developments in the field show how the dynamic of international law has changed the perceptions regarding the use of data from satellites and other sources. While the early activity was analyzed mostly from the perspective of classic international law, nowadays the perspective of human rights law and environmental law has gained increasing importance. Otto Koudelka, here, head of the Institute of Communication Networks and Satellite Communication at the Graz University of Technology, introduced the PRETI concept, an Austrian 3U CubeSat taking stock of the previous achievements of Austria in space, in which Otto was deeply involved. This satellite will be using passive reflectometry for sea height and ice height analysis and measurements, two important factors for monitoring climate change. Sias Mostert, the CEO of SCS Aerospace Group in South Africa and a pioneer of space in South Africa, presented its achievements of space technology and showcased different examples about the role of small satellite sensors in relation to global climate change monitoring. All sensors having been developed in South Africa for the sake of the South African space program. Gustavo Neco, professor at the Institute of Mechanics of Fluids and Environmental Engineering of the University of Uruguay, introduced the concept of climatonomy as compared to the traditional way of climatology, based on a holistic approach of long-term interactions between the Earth's spheres, atmosphere, hydrosphere, cryosphere, litho and pedosphere, and anthroposphere. He then presented the NASA's Earth Observing System and the World Meteorological Organization Global Observing System based on a constellation of satellites developed by all nations of the world. Finally, Javier Prechilzi, Associate Professor of the University of Uruguay and young entrepreneur, co-founder of Digital Sense Technologies, a company specialized on image processing and computer vision, presented the data processing techniques used in the SMOS, Soil Moisture and Ocean Salinity mission, to extract useful information from the satellite data in different fields of applications, agriculture, crop management plans, and the monitoring of cyanobacteria bloom. He showed in particular that image processing can also be used to restore degraded images. Thanks to this distinguished panel, the audience has had a chance to get the point of view of both institutional, academic and private actors, all involved in the space sector and in particular in the fight against climate change. Tackling climate change is a top priority for all, but much more remains to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive summary. And now coming to Plenary 5, the preservation of natural resources through space. Beatrice, your summary, please.
Yes, so I had the honor of being the moderator of session number 5, which title is The Preservation of Natural Resources Through Space, and I was joined by 4 distinguished speakers, which you see the pictures. So there was Mr. Adnan Arrais from the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, Professor Alejandro de Fuentes Talice from the Aeronautico Military School here in Montevideo, Andy Lucas from UK, property assurer, and Isao Kotani from JAXA, but resident in Washington. And the scope of the session was to see how space data are really a valuable asset to monitor, integrate, monitor, quantify, and preserve natural resources. So I took this slide from the presentation of the speaker from Abu Dhabi because I think natural resources are the same all around the world. Maybe you have to replace here in Uruguay the camel with a cow, but I think it gives a nice idea about natural resources. So we all know that they're important for all the topics that we have discussed, farming, fishing, climate change, but unfortunately they are scarce. So we need tools, we need means to preserve them and to make sure that we make an efficient use of them. So I would say it's not a surprise to say that natural resources matter all around the world. So we see here 2 examples of how they are monitored. On the left you see an image taken from Japan to analyze the effect of the tide, and on the right it's a land classification images from Dubai. So perhaps the phenomena are different because Dubai is more concerned about the certification, but all around the world, it's really, in every country, it's really important to monitor natural resources. Thanks to Andy Lucas, we also learned that thanks to space data, you can also see what's happening under the ground. So you can also monitor motion of the ground, so you can also see if there are shrinking or swelling movements on the terrain. And apparently in the UK that's really an issue, it has the same incident rate as flooding. So Property Assure, the company where Andy Lucas works, provided an operational service for insurance companies when they want, for instance, to make an assessment of a property when there is a claim, or to run a property investigation. So the tool looks like that. So you see that it's very precise for each property. It's assigned a risk factor, which takes into consideration not only the motion of the terrain, but also, of course, the age of the property, or if there is, for instance, a tree which is close by. Then, thanks to Professor Alejandro, we learned that whatever we do in space regarding natural resources must be done in according to this Magna Carta of space. I was impressed by this concept, which is a treaty which was ratified by a lot of countries in 1976 and by Uruguay in 1970. I mean, it's a good starting point because a lot of countries at least have reached a kind of a consensus, but this law was mainly generated for exploration activities, and as you can see is more than 50 years old, so for sure needs to be updated. So if I had to think about a recommendation, my starting point was to start from the pool question, and particularly from the pool answers. So for me, let's say the recommendations from this plenary are mainly two. The first one was already mentioned, so it's, I think we all agree within the sector that space data are important, not only observation, but also satellite navigation and satellite communication. But we need to convey this message, particularly to politicians, to governments. And because they have also to work together. I mean, several of the other panelists have mentioned the word working together, international cooperation. If you need to preserve natural resources, this is not just a nice desire, it's really a must. Because in order to see, to quantify these natural resources, you need to build long databases, meaning that you have to assure continuity of space missions. And this is only possible if there is such agreement between governments. And perhaps a way could be also to put in place tools such as the fund of the interlighting development banks to help startups, to help companies in exploring this kind of data. And the second point is about space law. I mean, as I said, it's more than 50 years old, this treaty, so it needs to be updated. And I would say that at minimum, it needs to take into account two main aspects. The first one is that, as Professor was mentioning, at the moment there is no clause to regulate the dispute regarding commercial activities in space. They are happening at the moment, so the law needs to follow that, it needs to update, to take that into account. And the second point is about data access, and we just learned this morning from the key speaker, the issue is not in accessing the data, but is in the rights of doing something with the data, in doing something with information contained in the data. So again, I think that's a point that should be followed up in the future. Thank you.
And now, final panel number 6, Otto, on democratizing space data.
Thank you very much, Christian. I have a slight caffeine deficit because I had to fix all the slides during the coffee break, so they might need a little bit tidying up if I have some typos, etc. Or if I missed something important, please let me know. There's still some time to do that. So, we had the keynote address by Catherine Dolderina, who set in an excellent way the theme, and she focused on the milestones to arrive at the wider availability of space data, particularly with respect to Earth observation. And we learned about the regulatory steps taken at the international and national level. We got an insight of the meaning and interpretation of free and open access. What does that really mean? And we heard about the challenges providing a wide availability of large data volumes. Copyright and IPR was touched, and the personal data protection rules, not surprisingly, have been classified as a concern. And then we came to the panel proper with Pablo Brenner, Jean-Pascal Lefranc, who kindly jumped in as we had one person who could not make it, Martin Rodriguez de los Santos from Antel and Crystal Wilson. Starting with the first panelist, he gave a very interesting example on data usage, so how relatively simple data, just looking at parking lots and the shadows in an oil reservoir, which you can consider this is nothing special, can be very interesting for instance, hedge funds and investors. And it was also said that nanosatellites make now the access to space more affordable, and this increases the big data capability, also opening up new opportunities for entrepreneurs. This was in every presentation. Privacy is an issue, and as it's being done in other digital data systems, anonymization is not as easy. With written text, this can be done quite easily, but with pictures, with images, this is much more difficult. So the recommendation was make privacy by design. So if your server is hacked, then those who access it should not retrieve any useful data. Jean-Pascal was quoting Jeff Bezos, "We are living at day one of the space age," and he said that the main drivers in the whole process are digitization and technology advances. We learned about the initiatives by GLAC for each domain in launches, Earth observation, telecom, science and defense. There is a search for disruptive new ideas. With Earth observation, quick, reliable and easy access to data is important. Also, constellations of small sats will provide higher resolution, but more importantly, faster, quicker, or higher revisit times. It was very interesting to hear to fight the digital divide in telecom with industry and Eutelsat. New technology for very high throughput 1 terabit satellites is being developed. So in due course we will have broadband data everywhere, and with the constellation also the microphone working? Okay. We will then bypass the problem that the penguins and the polar bears don't have Facebook and broadband data, so this will help definitely. Free access to Copernicus and high-speed internet access is very important. Also, the financial schemes will change, and CNES and in France, new entrepreneurs will be helped with new funds. Martin Rodriguez de los Santos, he gave us an interesting insight into the IT landscape here in Uruguay. Until operating submarine cables, data centers with different networks, providing services to customers not only in Uruguay but also in Argentina and North America for computing, storage, security and connectivity. Big data as a service is an important aspect, and data protection laws are an issue, he said. Space data, he called them the new big data, and for fields like agriculture and retail will become more important, but also companies are challenged to use the space data. And from the poll we saw, data protection is the biggest worry. And then Crystal Wilson, after a short introduction to the Secure World Foundation, she used the definition of CEOS, what is space democracy. So it addresses data access, software tools, data dissemination and capacity development. The awareness in Earth observation data usage is increasing. Nevertheless, it is slow, and in many areas there's still not the full understanding by the governments what they can get with it. And we heard before that key factors, the majority of the key factors necessary for assessing come from space data. So the variety of stakeholders are working in partnerships, increase of collaboration is seen, but further needed. She also mentioned that there needs to be a better engagement with the media, and we saw two interesting publications being produced by the Secure World Foundation, the one book, Open Space, and the other one, the Handbook for New Actors in Space. So without completeness, I tried to put in some key points which I also derived from the poll questions, like Beatrice. So we have to raise the awareness of the usefulness of space data, not only in the public, but also with the decision makers and the politicians. We have to be very careful with privacy issues, because this is a major concern. And in this context also, I mean, cybersecurity is critical, because if the data are there but not well protected and can be accessed and hacked easily, then the whole thing becomes irrelevant. And also, Crystal mentioned that regulation and legislation to take care of all these issues is highly important. And that concludes my summary. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Otto. I would like to really thank you all for your great leadership in all the panels, for your outstanding and informative summaries at the end, and I would like to ask you to give them another round of applause. Thank you very much for giving us. Thank you. And now it is time to almost say goodbye, but not before we hear also from a few words from the main organizer here from Uruguay. And we would also like to watch a short video afterwards, a short summary of what we have been doing here, some highlights. Please welcome on stage now for her closing remarks, Marta Gaggero, Chief Counsel of the Centro de Investigacion y Difusion Aeronautico-Espacial from Uruguay. I almost
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. We have reached the end of our GLAC 2018. The moderators of the various plenary sessions have just informed us about the discussions that took place during the meetings and their visions about the future of space applications. No doubt that the subject is of great interest to the space community. Therefore, we feel in this respect that future developments are to be closely followed. We hope our conference may have given the participants the opportunity of making new contacts and exploring possibilities of cooperation in the area of space applications. It has been a great honor for SIDAE and for our country to have hosted the GLAC 2018. The conference was attended by 179 delegates from 24 countries. Now, we must and want make several thanks. First of all, we very much appreciate the presence of all of you, many of whom took long trips to get here. We should especially thank the IAF and its efficient team for their contribution to the success of this meeting. We are also most grateful to our national authorities, official organizations and sponsors for their kind support and collaboration. All of them contributed to make this conference become known and hopefully successful. Last but not least, I would like to highlight the work of Victoria Alonso Perez, whose remarkable suggestions and commitment have made a difference in the organization of this event. Finally, for those who travel back to their homes, we wish you a safe trip and thank you for joining us. Bon voyage.
Thank you so much, Marta, for the nice words, but also for all the support you have given to us, for the IAF, in organizing this event. It was a real pleasure for us to come here to South America, and I really hope that we will have the opportunity to come back here again soon, considering the developments here in this region in the space sector. And now I'd like to give the word For the final closing remarks, to Otto again in his capacity as IAF Vice President for Technical Activities.
Thank you very much, Christian. Señoras y señores, ladies and gentlemen, dear delegates, dear friends and colleagues, as the Vice President of Technical Activities of the International Astronautical Federation, it's a great pleasure for me to say a few words at the end of this wonderful conference. I would like firstly to thank our host, the Centro de Investigacion y Difusion Aeronautico-Espacial, and specifically Marta Gaggero as the local organizing team chair, as well as the International Astronautical Federation. You have succeeded in providing us with an exceptional framework for our discussions. Also, I would like to express my sincere thanks to everyone who found the time to join us here in Montevideo, a very beautiful city, and contributed to this conference one way or the other. This Global Applications Conference in 2018 has been outstanding for the high-class topics it covered. We can positively say we learned enormously from the past 3 days. How space is being used around the world for socio-economic growth today and in the future. The promises within hybrid technology solutions to monitor agriculture, farming, maritime applications, and how we can use space applications to save lives, resources, and environmental disruption. How space technologies are useful to tackle the impacts of climate change, the importance of free access to space data, in particular for developing nations. GLAC 2018 has also provided ample networking opportunities for delegates, including a series of exciting social events like the SGAC IAF 3G Idea Networking Lunch, an amazing welcome reception, and a splendid gala dinner. I also learned at the welcome reception I really have to work hard on improve my tango, so there's really a lot to do. Now that we come to the end of this conference, I would like to invite you all to 2 very important upcoming events. This year, in the first week of October, from the 1st to the 5th, the entire space community will assemble in Bremen, Germany, for the 69th International Astronautical Congress, the biggest space congress in the world. This will be the occasion to discover how we can involve everyone in the space sector, and we look forward to seeing you all there. And there's another important event at the end of April. The IAF and the IAF member, the Centro Royal de Télédétection Spatiale, will co-host in partnership with the French space agency CNES the next chapter of global conferences, the Global Conference on Space for Emerging Countries. GLAC 2019 will take place in Rabat, Morocco, and it will address various topics of interest for space developing and emerging nations and regions, with a specific focus on sustainable development goals and the contribution of space. Then space activities and their impacts on socio-economic development, climate change mitigation, space community contributions, cooperation for emerging countries, space services and digital economy. Last but not least, there is a big thanks due to Christian Feichtinger, the IAF Executive Director, and his outstanding IAF Secretariat team. Congratulate you to this wonderful team. They have the fantastic ability to get all the volunteer workers like us in the office and in other activities to fulfill our task more or less in time, even when we have no time, and even when the job is sometimes not the one we like so much, but they manage that. And thank you for that. This is really great. So without this assistance, the conference would not have been possible to arrange. To everyone in this room, I hope you can be proud of having contributed to this unique global space application conference. Let us now enjoy a quick summary and highlight video from these past 3 days we spent together.